Hello, everybody out there in podcast land, and welcome to the Pop Culture Basement. My name is Mike Jamison. I'm your host, and with me tonight, down in the basement, it is their first podcast. So we are all going to be gentle, and we are all going to give a warm welcome to Melody. Melody, how you doing?
I'm good.
Are you still nervous?
Very.
You should not be nervous. Especially with me. I'm the most non-threatening person you can meet, so you shouldn't be nervous around
That's
me.
very true. Your hat is very non-threatening.
It is. Well, it's an Eagles hat. On some Eagles fans, it would be threatening just because they're unmitigated disasters of human beings, but not me. I'm one of the few fans who are actually the nice Eagles fans. But tonight, Melody has joined me to discuss something near and dear to our hearts as proud Gen Xers, the Muppets.
Oh yes, very excited to talk about the Muppets, of which a venerated veteran of the Muppets, having I was born in May 8th, 1977, so I was kind of there to see all the big explosion of all the big IP, the Muppet Show, followed by the movies in the 80s and the 90s, Star Wars, MCU, all of that stuff. So just not to toot my own horn, but got there before everybody else. So,
well, first of all, you are younger than I am, so congratulations, because I was born in November of 74, so yes, I'm 50. Feel like I'm 70, but I'm 50, so you're younger than I am. But yes, you are correct. We are the lucky generation because we got to experience all of this amazing content firsthand. And one of the things I'm doing now with guests, and I want to ask you, is because I've talked to guests now that I'm going outside my bubble of just living on the East Coast and talking to people on the East Coast. First of all, did you have a basement growing up? Did you have a certain place where you would go to watch movies or watch TV or read or play video games? Was there a basement that you would go to? Was it your room? What was?
well, in Oregon, basements were really rare. We didn't have a lot of tornadoes or hurricanes or anything like that. So there, if you had a basement, usually it was put in by the owner, and it was a little on the sketchy side. So someone's got a basement, you're not going down there.
And even mine, I always relate to people when I'm recording these episodes that I am actually down in my basement. And now I grew up in Philadelphia, but now I live outside of Philadelphia. I'm a suburban dad. And I actually do have a basement that it's partially underground, but so a real basement. When I was growing up, I had a basement, but it was a basement in a row home. So it was basically, we had 3 floors and the bottom floor was the basement, but it wasn't underground. It was, you could walk out. See, I was lucky where I grew up in Southwest Philly. It was kind of the last part of the city that they built and they developed. So I was lucky that I grew up in the city in a row home, but I had a field. I had 2 fields right next to me. I had a huge churchyard right next to me because I grew up Catholic. So the church that was in our neighborhood was right next to our house. So it was like growing up in the suburbs in the city. And my basement was just basically the bottom floor of the house. So it wasn't really an underground basement. You could walk out of it. I had an above ground pool in my backyard. It was a small backyard. It filled up the whole backyard. So this is one of the good things about this podcast is I'm talking and interacting with people who are not from the East Coast and who it's not the same way that I grew up, which I always tell my wife is a Lutheran and I grew up Catholic. And whenever she says to me or asks why I don't know certain things or why I act the way I do, I say, I grew up Catholic. Those are the only people I knew. Those were the only people in my neighborhood and in my family. That's all I knew. I had to get out into the world and meet other people to see that there were people who did things differently. So now talking to other people on this podcast, I'm learning about how their setups were with taking in their pop culture. But also one of the other good things about this podcast or about podcasting in general is I think you and I met talking because of the Best Care Anywhere podcast. I think interacting online.
It was because I was looking for another podcast. Because I travel a lot to go to work and come back, and so I need kind of like to hear a voice. I'm going down there and coming back, and I saw the boys were doing a MASH podcast. I'm like, oh man, I love MASH. So I want to hear what they have to say, and just they're really funny, they're really witty, and just it's amazing what people, not that I'm old, because I'm not, uh, but younger than I, their opinion on the show that was new for people like us, and I'm just like, it's just amazing to hear them, and they're really funny, and they think of a lot of things that, like, oh yeah, that I did not think of that or look at that in that light, and so it's been fun, and so just interacting with the kind of everyone was as we kind of gathered for the show, and you and Chief Smash and the Mash Historian have just been amazing to talk to, because you guys are all super nice, and so it's just kind of like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll always call out those guys and I don't think they believe it sometimes. I know they joke about it, but it's a really nice community that's grown up around that show, and it has. I've met you through there, Chief Smash, the Mash Historian, Bella Sissa, who I'm going to have on the show, and it's going to be people that I have on here also, because when I started this, I knew I wanted to have guests every episode, and I was like, okay, well, I could pull from my family, which is nice, but then what am I going to do after those first 3 or 4 shows? I need to get other people, and that's when I started putting out feelers for people in the Best Care Anywhere community to possibly come on, which I've gotten feedback on, so that'll be fun. And just getting to talk to people and getting to see them and see who they are in real life, and as I said, get to see their offices and their cool stuff that they have in the background. That's also very cool. So we are here tonight to talk about the Muppets. And this was one of the first subjects that I thought about when I wanted to do this show, just because I don't even think I think about it that much, but they were such a big part of my life growing up, and also how much they're not a big part of someone like my son and daughter. When I told my son tonight, he asked me what subject I was doing for the podcast, and I told him the Muppets, and he kind of looked at me, and I said, "Yeah, you don't know anything about the Muppets, do you?" And he went, "No, I really don't." And maybe that's a failure of my parenting, because especially when my son was born, he was born first. I used to watch Sesame Street with him. Now I'm somebody who grew up on Sesame Street and Electric Company, and that was
Oh,
viewing every
I,
day.
I think I was the only kid in Oregon who knew about the Electric Company.
Oh, the
'Cause,
Electric Company was great.
their Spider-Man was the definitive Spider-Man for me.
Spidey
And
Super Stories.
yeah, and just, and the original series with Nick something.
Nicholas Hammond.
That's right. And just, you know, just looking back on it now, it's like, oh man, those production values. Woo! They did a
And
lot.
Spider-Man. I love that they took a character who is known for his wisecracking, and he didn't speak at all, which was
Yeah, well, and
it's a choice.
they did a lot with $10. Let me just put
Yeah.
it that way.
Well, I will tell you this now. We're not even into our main subject yet, but I may have to ask you back, because I wanted to do an episode on the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man. A couple of years ago, I have a videotape of the pilot episode, and I had it downloaded onto a flash drive so I could watch it. I watched it with my son and said, "This is what I grew up with. This is all I had before the MCU and Batman '89." And he watched it with me, and I could tell he kind of looked at me like, I feel bad for you." I needed him to know how lucky he was. But to get back, and we will go off on tangents, audience, that's what this show is all about. It's a celebration of all pop culture and all tangents, so we will go off on tangents. But yeah, so my son kind of gave me a look, and maybe it is a parental failure on my part, but I feel like Sesame Street, and I might be wrong, it might be my experience, isn't as big of a pop culture landmark for some parents as it was. And I don't want to sound like I'm saying that definitively. I used to watch, I think it was on Disney Channel. They had half-hour blocks called Classic Sesame Street, and they would show some of the classic skits from the 70s and the 80s. It was a lot of Elmo, but it was early Elmo when he was less annoying than he is now. So I would watch that with my son, but it's the as much as I've been able to turn him on to comic books and Star Wars and all that kind of pop culture ephemera that I like, I was never able to turn him on to the Muppets. And he has not even watched any of the Muppet movies, which is a failure in parenting on my part. And I will hang my head in shame and stand in the corner afterwards on recording this podcast. But how do you feel about growing up with it, do you feel like that the Muppets, not just Sesame Street, because we're really going to be talking about the Muppets and not the Sesame Street Muppets, but the Muppets in general have kind of fallen out of the spotlight a little bit?
Yeah, it's well, unfortunately, you can say that just everything has sped up because like pop culture is now seen at a clip instead of like you get to enjoy something for months and or years, like TV show or a season, and it's just like it's on the pop culture is like on to the next thing. And so back in the in the 70s and the 80s, that was the thing. There wasn't other things to move on to. Broadcast channels were only three stations, and then you got like a couple local ones. Here in Oregon, we had KPTV 12 and a Fox affiliate, and so that was it. That was, there wasn't a lot on the dial. And so if wasn't, and we definitely didn't have VCRs. And so if you weren't watching it, you didn't get to see it. And so, really now's I feel like even though this stuff it's, air quotes in the past, it's the best time to see it. Cause I'll pull up Grover clips, of him bothering the guy with his soup, and I didn't realize that Grover taught me sarcasm, and just and to tie it to the Muppets, Gonzo taught me to be whimsical. Miss Piggy taught me to be happy with myself, and Kermit, whoever the straight man, taught me to life's going to get weird. I just have to roll with it.
Well, I think that is the most perfect encapsulation of the Muppets and their relationship to us and our personalities I've ever heard. So I'm going to steal that when I talk to other people about the Muppets. But to give a little background, I think people don't realize that how long the Muppets have been around. I don't think they've realized that it wasn't even really Kermit that was the first breakout star, but it was Ralph, who starred in a bunch of
Right.
commercials.
It was the James Dean show, or Jimmy Dean.
Yeah, Jimmy Dean, yeah.
And those coffee commercials in the 60s that Jim was using to kind of finance everything and keep the train running.
Which are just
Willikins Coffee. That's it. Willikins Coffee.
And they're deliciously insane in a way that I don't think that you would never think you would see. And it's the early 60s. It's not even flower power and everything is changing. It's the early 60s, and there is such a subversive streak in there that you saw what the Muppets were going to become in these little 30-second or minute bursts, and it's just amazing to watch them. I think you can go online and they have compilations of the commercials.
Yeah,
and they're violent.
So many they're scary violent.
Sure.
Like, back in the 70s when we were growing up, our commercials were like, how would you like a wine punch? And like, some guy would get socked. But these are like from the 60s in black and white, and it's Muppet on Muppet violence with cannons and falling trees, and just like, the proto Kermit murdering the other guy because he didn't want Willikins coffee. And I'm just like, this must be some really good coffee.
So it did its job, basically.
Yeah, I've never looked it up. I should have looked up if there's still some around. Like if they got bought up, but they're still being made.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I automatically was wondering. I wonder if they're still around. But as the 60s moved on, people would see the Muppets on Ed Sullivan's show. They would be on a bunch of variety shows. And then by the late 60s, with the advent of Sesame Street, Jim Henson was one of the first people they brought in, because they knew that if they were going to try to get an educational message out to kids, that almost like we just said, the kind of, and I don't think they were looking for insanity. They knew he would not talk down to children. And I think this was the new way that they wanted them to learn. So, of course, with Sesame Street, the Muppets exploded, but always in the background, Henson wanted to prove that the Muppets weren't just for kids. And it's interesting.
Yeah, and it also ties into his Saturday Night Live appearances.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Even before that, and it was fun to look back into research with the Muppets, there were 2 primetime specials that he did even before they were on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, wow.
It was a Muppet Valentine Day special, and it was another one that was called Muppets Sex and Violence.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was basically and that introduced Sam the Eagle, introduced a bunch of characters that had not yet burst upon the scene, but that it was parodying the sex and violence that was on television. And both didn't do that well, so they were discouraged. That again, Henson was trying to bring it into a more mature comedy
Yeah.
area.
Yeah, Jim was always fascinated by what can I do next, and that's how we get the Muppet movies in the 80s, and the Dark Crystal, and Labyrinth, which is whenever they do an anniversary showing in the theater, it's like, oh, pack up the family and the kids, we got to go see Labyrinth again, because if I don't see Jareth and his giant, I'm just like
that was a staple. And every episode I talk about, I don't know about you guys, but we had a local cable channel. Before I even had cable, we had a local cable channel in the Philadelphia area called Prism that my aunt, who lived 2 doors away from me, had, because my uncle and my dad were big Philadelphia Flyers fans. So you could get all their games on this cable channel. She had Prism, and we would, living 2 doors away, we would go over there and watch Flyers games. But they also, it was like HBO. It had movies, and that's where I saw a lot of movies I shouldn't have been watching. But they would play the Dark Crystal all the time. They would also play the Muppet movie and the Great Muppet Caper all the time. So this is how I got to see these movies over and over and over again. You brought it up. I don't think a lot of people realized that the Muppets were on Saturday Night Live the first season and the very beginning of the second season. And I'm currently right now, after the SNL 50th anniversary, they re-released the first 5 years on DVD. So I bought the box set. So I've been watching the first 5 seasons of SNL, and specifically the first season is when the Muppets are on. They were the Land of Gorch, were the segments that the Muppets were on. And over the years, they have gotten a really bad rap. They talk about when the show was on that first season, especially head writer Michael O'Donoghue, I think, had a famous quote where he said, "I don't write for felt." The writers and the performers did not want to write skits for them. They didn't think that they were funny. It was Henson and Frank Oz were doing voices, and they felt ostracized, and they could tell that the not ready for primetime players really did not want to have them on the show. Watching the whole first season, I think, and I wanted to save this for when I do my SNL episode, but who knows when that'll be. I think people revere that original cast and think that every skit and everything they did was gold and everything was funny. Watching it, it's a lot like SNL now, where some stuff is very, very funny and some stuff does not work. And it's the same thing with the Muppets. Some of they're short segments; they're not too long. Some of them are funny, and they are more adult. You can see that they're kind of talking about drugs, they're talking about sex.
Yeah, it reminds me of another Henson project, Dinosaurs,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing the dad and the kids, just reminding me of, like, he just really wanted to show families in different settings, and so that's why I think why he really hit it with the Muppets is that they're just a family. Kermit is the dad, Miss Piggy is the mom, and and Gonzo is Gonzo. He's like Dr. Manhattan. He in every iteration he is just Gonzo. What was Gonzo? He's, like it says in the crate in the Great Muppet Caper. It says whatever.
And that gets us to, so when they left, and they bring it up early in the second season of SNL, they bring back the Muppet characters, and they kind of address, where have you been? And they say, oh, we've been in England and we've been filming our new show, which is the Muppet Show. That I think the Muppet Show is really the best distillation of what Henson wanted to do, because his stuff always appealed not only to kids but to adults as well. And that's something I think that's something that we are lucky. You know, we joke about it being Gen X, but we we weren't talked down to back then. I can remember watching the Muppet Show, and this is something else I always say in these episodes, in my basement with my dad on our small TV. I can remember the cover that I used to pull over me. It was a brown and green because it was the 70s and 80s. So it was a brown and green cover that had holes in it that I would put my fingers through and play with while I was watching the show. But watching the Muppet Show with my dad and him cracking up while I was cracking up, and me probably half of the jokes flying over my head, but also getting to see Christopher Reeve, who was Superman, and getting to see Mark Hamill, who was Luke Skywalker, and also getting to see Alice Cooper and Vincent Price and all of these other guest stars that wanted to be on that show and wanted to get to interact with the Muppets.
Yeah, and it was such an amazing platform. Uh, and you know, the one thing I'll mention one tidbit about Star Wars because I could be here all day with that stuff.
That's okay.
But the Empire Strikes Back outfit, the Bestman outfit, air quotes known as the Bestman outfit, premiered first on the Muppet Show.
That's right.
The movie hadn't come out yet, and when I learned that, my little brain broke. I'm just like, wow, because the Bestman outfit is my most favorite outfit. It's just like
that is the coolest outfit. I can remember having the action figure and playing with that. It might be tied with the Han Solo on Hoth blue jacket outfit. But the Bestman outfit is right up there.
Yeah, because it's just it read like adventurer, you know, because it had pockets upon pockets and just that low slung belt just off to the side, and just like, oh man, Luke's going to get into some trouble.
I say in these episodes and on my other podcasts that I do, Sleazebag Cinema, everything comes back to MASH and everything comes back to Star Wars. So everything can loop back in to Star Wars and MASH, and then we can go off on those tangents also. But yeah, I remember that episode. I wish for this podcast, there's so much that I remember about the Muppets, but I also wanted to watch the 3 original movies. And as I was watching them on Disney Plus, and they have the Muppet Show on Disney Plus, and I wish I had time to just watch all of the Muppet Show episodes. I don't, but sitting in that basement with my dad and my dad cracking up, that's why I do think it is the perfect distillation of the Muppets, because adults enjoyed them and they knew that they can let their kids watch them. Kids enjoyed them because they were funny and they were slapstick and things were blowing up or things were falling over. But adults enjoyed them because there was sophisticated humor, and Jim Henson knew how to talk to both the adults in the room and the kids in the room. And that's not something to take lightly, because people have been trying that for years, and there are very few people who have ever been able to find that balance and do it successfully like he did. And when I say he, I mean all the other. There's so many people, Frank Oz among them, who I don't think gets enough credit for how brilliant he is, and not just as Yoda, and all the puppeteers who did the voices. It's just amazing, the murderer's row of talent that they had on Sesame Street, on the Muppet Show, on the movies that were working at that time.
Oh yeah, I think it really helped that they were just, you know, because we're moving from the 60s into the 70s where everything's just kind of like, well, you know, Vietnam was hard, let's do something else now. And so just that explosion of young people wanting to, like, I've got to do this, and Jim had to make that show. And it's like, but I can't, you know, like, and he was wise enough to know he can't do it, and he thankfully found Frank, because those guys were like peanut butter and jam just together, just like, wow. And have you ever seen the they're not outtakes, it's test footage of Kermit and Fozzie in an England field, and they're just effing with the cows, like, just, you know, like they're kind of like wrapped around a tree because they're like, they're up here and they're trying to just get in the shot. Just think, how did this look on camera stock? How does this look out in the real world and not in this, like, you know, this environment where we've set up for them of the Muppet Show? And so they're just kind of like, you know, shooting the breeze. And here's Fozzie talking to the cows, and then, you know, and then Kermit drops the bomb that they're Muppets and that they're just puppets, and he goes, "What?" It's just that kind of insanity. He really found his other half, finding Frank, because he could found someone who could bounce ideas off of. And there's just you find something like that, and the sky's the limit, especially with someone as talented as those guys were.
I'm not breaking new ground by saying that they are an underrated comedy team, that people don't think of them that way, but they really were. And they just had that natural, easy type of friendship and easy type of chemistry where they were Bert and Ernie. They were Fozzie
Mhm.
and Kermit. And they could be funny, and they could make you laugh, and they could make you cry, and they could make you care. And that is not easy. And to do it not as themselves on camera, but to do it while they're using puppets. And that's something else I want to kind of bring up, that you're saying they're doing that test footage. I think it's taken for granted. And unfortunately, in a lot of podcasts I'm on, I think I say this all the time, and it makes me sound like the crotchety, curmudgeonly old man that I am. But now that you can do anything on camera, we take for granted all of the innovations that they just made look easy back then. That you bought this, that you watched Kermit play a banjo in the swamp, and you're not thinking this is just a piece of felt and wire and string, or a bunch of puppets riding bicycles.
Yeah. It's amazing just how much life they put into those creations. Because I'm sure you've seen the clip when Jim was on the Arsenio Hall show with Rolf, and he's got one arm bandaged up because he doesn't have Frank there with him, and then Arsenio's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And Jim Henson goes, "Hey, son of a bitch," and everyone's out clapping. He's like, "No, that's good. Dogs say that to other dogs. It's great." And it was just and you were talking about how they were using the characters. They really use them to highlight aspects of their personality. Like Henson said multiple times that he was Rolf, and when he passed away, Henson Company, I think for like a decade, retired Rolf. Like they no performers. He wasn't in any advertising. It was just that's how much Henson was that character.
Getting back to what you were saying about him being on the Arsenio Hall show, that, and there's footage of him on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and that's another amazing bit of magic that I think that Jim Henson could do, is that he would sit there with Kermit or Rolf on his arm and talk to the host as Kermit or Rolf. And in your head, you're listening to Kermit and Rolf talk back to the host and not thinking, okay, Jim Henson is sitting right there and manipulating this puppet. You buy that it's the puppet talking to the host and telling the jokes and interacting. And
Exactly. Like you'd watch Johnny interact with Kermit, and it's just, I think he said it on that Tonight Show. It's like you just ignore the man in the beard, and you like once you draw attention to it, you're like, oh yeah, whoa. But he's like, yeah, there's Kermit just talking with the king of the night show.
so with the Muppet Show, I think people forget, or people might not know, that was a syndicated show. They were in England. Sir Lou Grade had bankrolled Henson. So they were in England making the shows and just pumping out a bunch. And I had read his biography, and it kind of stresses how just time consuming and how much stress was being put not only on him but on all the performers and the writers to get these shows out. And they were brilliant. I mean, they were, it was one of the first big syndicated successes that there was on TV. This is the late 70s, where cable is not as big as it is now. So there were only 3 or maybe 4 channels that you would have to watch things, but it became appointment viewing. And that's when Henson, who had always wanted to make movies, decided that, yes, I think we can do a full movie of the Muppets. And that's how we got the Muppet movie. Now, for me, I don't remember the Muppet movie as a theater going experience. I might have possibly seen it. For me, it was more after and watching it on cable. And for this podcast, that was the main thing that I watched. I watched the 3 main, and I say main in air quotes, Muppet movies, because they're the Muppet movies that I grew up with. And I used to always think that The Great Muppet Caper was my favorite, but after watching the 3 again, and maybe it's because I'm older, maybe it's because I have kids, maybe it's because I'm married. The first Muppet movie I do think now is my favorite. I think it is the most magical of the 3, and plus it has the best songs, also.
Oh yeah, like
that's something we haven't even talked about is the amazing earworms that are Muppet songs that just can get in your head.
When anyone, anywhere, I hear the words "moving," "right," and "along" close to each other, and I'm just like moving right along, loose and fancy free, like just the rest of the song. I'll spare you having to hear it, but it just any kind of fork in the road, and it's like I don't believe it.
And working with Paul Williams doesn't hurt at the height of his of his powers in the 70s.
Yeah, I always thought Paul Williams was the guy from the Smoking the Bandit movies growing up, because that was the first time I saw him. My parents let me see a lot of movies in the theater they probably never should have let me see.
Well, we're 70s and 80s kids, so that's all of us.
And so, and like, the guy from Smoking the Bandit, yeah, he does stuff. What stuff? And then, looking up his career, the Phantom of the
Paradise.
That's right. Thank you.
Yep.
And he wrote hits for Three Dog Night, and just, like if you don't cry at Rainbow Connection,
yes, that's what we were gonna. Yes,
you have no heart.
You have a black, shriveled heart if you do not. If you don't cry at Rainbow Connection or the last song, also the Life is a Movie.
Yeah,
make your own ending. I can remember listening to that on my phone at work one day, and actually starting to get weepy at work as I listened to it, and I had to stop the song because I was like, okay, I need to take this home and do this in my own personal space and not do this in work as I start to bawl uncontrollably. Well, and off on another tangent alert, there is a Paul Williams documentary out there that came out 5 or 6 years ago that is, if you enjoy his work with the Muppets, it's very interesting. It's a good documentary, so I would seek that out. And all of our listeners also.
So to cue you into how much I love the Muppets, a friend of mine is a really good singer. We had her sing Rainbow Connection at my wife's and I wedding.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous of you. But as I said, to watch that opening scene, and as it goes into the swamp, and you just see Kermit sitting there playing the banjo and singing, it just I hadn't watched the movies in a long time, and I'm just brought back, and automatically my brain, I become a 10-year-old, and I remember everything that's going to happen. And people wanted to guest star in that movie. Big stars wanted to be with the Muppets. And so that's how I learned about who Dom DeLuise was. That's how I learned about who Mel Brooks was before I probably knew about Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles. Yeah, because these people wanted to be with the Muppets.
Like, watching the Muppet movie was my first, exposure to Steve Martin. And, like, that guy, if you wanted a whole podcast, it's about Steve Martin.
Oh yeah,
because he's been
stop giving me ideas.
Sorry.
You know how hard it is to schedule these podcasts.
Well, if you ever get to Steve Martin on the list, come back. I'll be here.
Hold on. I'm marking you down right now. Yeah, I watching the movie again, and I knew it was coming, but that's one of my favorite parts. And you're right. I think that might be one of my first exposures to Steve Martin. Or maybe I had seen bits and pieces of The Jerk or one of those. I for some reason, I always remember Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid being on cable when I was younger.
Our local station, the KPTV 12 out of Portland, played Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid and what's the My Two Brains?
The man with two brains, yeah.
Which I saw in the theater, which I don't know why my parents let me go see that. That's the most adult movie. It's like, oh my God. Like,
our parents, they did not care. They plopped us in front of the TV or took us to the movies. I dropped my son off last week to watch the Minecraft movie. And I said to him, and I said to my wife, I freely admitted, I said, I have no idea. I mean, I kind of know what Minecraft is. I said, I don't know what this movie's about, what's in it. I kind of figured it was fine, but go ahead. And then I think to myself, my parents would just, I was watching Saturday Night Live when I was 7 or 8 years old and going into 3rd grade, 4th grade and doing bits from Saturday Night Live. So my parents didn't care. They just plopped me down, went back upstairs and lit up a cigarette and, and had a
Yeah,
beer.
I know. Just that unfettered TV time was just filled our brains with stuff.
But it's great stuff. That's how we learned all this stuff. And
Yeah,
especially
exactly.
like the first Muppet movie is so comfortably 70s and early 80s. It's just like a comfortable blanket. It really does. It took me back to my basement was like the basement I have now because I do not like bright lights. So I have one light on. It's really dark down here, and that it must be because that's how I grew up in the 70s and 80s in my basement. It was all brown and 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 green and very dark because we had only one lamp. We had paneled walls and we had a small TV, and that's how I consumed all of my multimedia.
Yep, yep. Grew up just the same. In fact, at my parents' house, in my room that I used to occupy, still is the same shag carpeting from
Oh,
when the house
wow.
was built. And I'm
Wow.
like, so every time I go over there, I kind of go like, "Hi, carpet. How are you?"
But one thing about the Muppet movie, and you brought it up, it was the 60s bleeding into the 70s. And as much as the 60s are fondly remembered, I love the 70s even more because it's almost like everybody was blown away by the 60s. So during the 70s, for good or ill, you could get away with all of that kind of stuff. And Henson, I don't think, is remembered for how much of a counterculture kind of icon that he is.
Oh yeah, huge.
And the stuff that you brought up with Gonzo, I mean, this is stuff that you're sneaking in as a message to kids. You know, you're not hitting them on the head, but yeah, he's different and he looks
Yeah,
different and
his
he's
girlfriend
weird.
was a
But you
chicken.
know what? Yeah, his girlfriend's a chicken. Who cares? I think
Exactly.
they even bring up jokes about a frog and a pig wanting being in love.
Yeah,
And
to segue into the Muppets Take Manhattan when Kermit gets a bump on the head, and he adds up in an ad agency, and they go to the same cafe that they've been worried about him, and he's like freaking out, like like, me and a pig, just until she loses her nut and knocks him across the room, ending his amnesia. It was just in just the artistry and the technical stuff, like how they did the bicycles. Like,
yeah, which I didn't want to read about, but I did to see because as I was watching it, I'm sitting there and I'm just looking at the screen and I'm saying to myself, I need to know how they did this. I need to know. And it was, I mean, it was old school. It was marionette invisible strings that they were able to manipulate. And sometimes they were long shots. So with some of the bigger Muppets, they were able to put people into the outfits to do it. But most of it was they weren't really moving, or if they were, it was somebody, I think it was his son, it was Jim Henson's son pulling the bikes off camera.
yeah,
And
yeah, I'd read that they kind of like they had kind of got them like, and then welded them together to the point where they could like just get someone on one end on the other and kind of pull them, and it's just like, wow, just how, like the long division you have to do to think of that kind of stuff. And like the car from the first one, it was just Frank and Jim on their backs with the driver in the trunk on this little CTV monitor. I'm like, oh my god, that's terrifying.
yeah. Or even the I keep bringing up the swamp scene from the beginning. That they had
Yeah,
a tank under the water, and he's manipulating the puppet with his hands outside of the tank from underwater. And I'm thinking to myself, this can't be safe.
it
This can't
wasn't.
be.
I
But
did like, well, okay, Chip's got the shot. We got to get him out there like 10 minutes ago. He's out of air. He's been holding it.
But he was adamant because he believed in the artistry of puppetry. That was something that Jim Henson always believed in and wanted to bring a bigger appreciation, and always thought that he could get it out there more into the mainstream and make it more appreciated, which I think he did by doing these movies and pushing the boundaries. You brought up earlier The Dark Crystal. That was after he was done with those early Muppet movies. That's why he wanted to get even more into more fantasy and maybe
Yeah,
more
yeah,
adult kind of stuff. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but he always did believe in that. He always believed in the power of the imagination and the power of puppetry, and he was the perfect ambassador for it.
yeah, and even the TV show The Storyteller
Yes.
is part of the Muppet history, because it was just his love of innovation and pushing the tech as hard as it'll go, even to the point of it sometimes breaking.
Mm-hmm.
But in that breakage, that's where you find like just this like beautiful work. You're just like, whoa, I'm thinking things and seeing possibilities I hadn't thought of before, or just seeing things I hadn't like hadn't thought of before. Like the episode of The Storyteller that's my favorite is when that guy captures death, and just a simple puppet, but it's just so done so beautifully that you just like, oh, you just feel that.
Yeah, and that what you're saying right there, he was able to make you feel for these characters, and they're not human characters. Some directors and actors can't get you to feel for them as humans acting on screen and directing other humans on screen, and he could do this with a piece of cloth and make you cry and make you feel for them and make you remember this 40 something years later. So
Mm-hmm.
now the Great Muppet Caper is the one that I think I remember as the first time I was really truly aware of the Muppets. Now, not the Sesame Street Muppets, because I grew up with Sesame Street, but the Muppets themselves. And I think one was because I remember getting the glasses that they had as the tie-in for the movie at
Yeah,
Burger King
yeah.
when I was
Every kid
growing
our
up.
age had a Burger King glass from a movie.
But I was also, and I think this one too I saw on cable, but I was a little bit older when I started watching it. I always thought that was my favorite out of those original three. It doesn't mean, now that I said the Muppet movie is better, it doesn't diminish the Great Muppet Caper. It's still very, very, very funny, and it has an amazing performance by Charles Grodin, who was also back then in the late 70s, early 80s at the peak of his powers, and
Oh yeah,
he fully commits to his part as being in love with Miss Piggy. And
yeah.
he is not winking at the he's
No,
not
he's
winking
not.
at the camera. He's doing it and it's funny as hell, but he's not doing it as a haha, I'm doing this and I'm supposed to be in love
No, no.
with this
Him and
puppet.
brother Nicky, he was evil incarnate. He was so good, and just like I I, I was just I sing to myself, "Here she is, Miss Piggy," to myself all the time. It was you, a dream come true. I'm just like that's some top flight writing right there. If you're singing a dubbed over line from the mid '80s.
And that also had the big Miss Piggy swimming scene, which was also
Yeah.
that was something when it was coming up, and in my head it just flashed. I said to myself, "Oh, the Miss Piggy in the pool scene is coming up." I hadn't watched this movie in years, but it's something that's stuck in the recesses of my brain. It was something you really hadn't seen at all done.
No, no. You've never seen a character this tall jump into a pool and just swim effortlessly. I think I remember reading about how many pigs they had to have make, because some could get wet, some could not get wet. This is just for the water scene, so it's just imagine the amount of craftsmen you need, like a small country worth of people just making these, just essentially Miss Piggy over and over and over for different shots.
And one thing I have noticed watching all these movies, I had never appreciated fully the Electric Mayhem band. I actually got more into them watching the 3 movies. They were never one of my favorites, but now I actually was enjoying them more than I did before. So that was really fun to revisit. And I do like the bit with Fozzie and Kermit being twin brothers, and everybody's saying, "Oh, now I can see it."
That like that and the cabbie in England when and he's like, well, what floor are you on? Like, well, we're in this. Like, I'm sorry, I can only take you to the lobby. Just
Beauregard, Bo.
yeah, Bulwark. I love him, but just the, this, like he's yelling at him, and they're like, you're twins, and then they're like, it's the hat. And it goes, oh yeah, the hat. I'm just.
There's also jokes, and I brought up the Electric Mayhem, and I'm not sure if it's the Muppet movie or it's Great Muppet Caper. Could even be Muppets Take Manhattan, where they're all talking, and I think it's the Great Muppet Caper, and they get lower, and in Janice, and they all stop talking, and she keeps going, and she's saying, well, I told him that, like, you can't see me without my clothes on unless you pay me a certain amount of money. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is what I was watching. And this is what he was able to get away with because he had such goodwill with everyone that he could slip that in there and nobody cares. And me as an 8-year-old, I didn't get it. I didn't understand.
It's that 10% of naughty. It's just, 90% wholesome, but that 10% is going to get you because like he knows that we're transitioning. So we're like, we as an audience have already expected the scene to move on, but he's like, I'm going to just sneak this in here. And, see who's still paying attention.
It was also, I did get to realize as I was watching the Great Muppet Caper that the Mallory Gallery that they break into, and that name has stuck in my head all of my life, but the Mallory Gallery that they break into is Wayne Manor from Batman '89.
Really?
Yes, I'm looking at it, and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I think this is Wayne Manor. So I looked it up, and yes, it's Wayne Manor.
Oh my! Wow.
Which was cool. The three cat burglars also stuck in my young mind.
Yeah. Just animal going, whoa, man, whoa.
Yes.
Yeah, just for prepubescent persons, like yeah.
But again, that's what he was able to. You didn't care because it was Animal, and everybody loves Animal, so we didn't care that he was chasing after women.
Well, because he did it respectfully.
That's right. And then I got to the Muppets Take Manhattan, and that one has always been, not that I don't like it, but it's always been my least favorite. For me, it's always, I can remember by that time when that came out, I was probably 10 or 11. So I actually watched Muppet Babies on Saturday morning. So it was a big thing to see the Muppet Baby, to see the Muppet Baby part, and to think about that started the whole whatever babies trend, because Muppet Babies did it first. They did it best also. But after that, it was Flintstone Babies and
well, and Simpson gags of like Jim Henson's Watchmen Babies.
That's right.
Even nowadays, you go so and so's dash babies, and everyone gets it.
And Muppets Take Manhattan, it seemed you can very much tell it's made in a certain time. It feels very early 80s to me. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but even Miss Piggy's hairdo is very early 80s.
Yeah.
She has a hairdo like my mom did back in the early 80s, very permed out and frizzy.
Yeah,
I do love the
moms in the 80s had permed hair.
I did love seeing Gregory Hines, rest in peace. His cameo is very, very good. I think by that point, it's weird. It's also, I think, the least amount of cameos in Muppets Take Manhattan. Liza Minnelli is in it.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of who else.
One lady who used to do the red carpet thing.
Joan Rivers.
That's it. Thank you.
That's actually a funny part.
Oh, it is. It's just them. She got fired, and so they're just freaking like.
Well, I do want to bring up, and I don't mean this. I don't want you to storm off of my podcast in anger, because I don't know how you feel about the character. But after watching the 3 movies, I'm not the biggest Miss Piggy fan. I find her annoying. I've always been a big Gonzo fan. Always been a big Sam the Eagle fan. Fozzie, I love Fozzie. I want to give Fozzie a big hug. For some reason, I like New Zealand also. I think he's very funny. And now I have the new appreciation for the Electric Mayhem band.
Just whatever you're doing, like Lou, what are you up for? Anything you want to do. It's just like he's got fish.
Well, I do like when Scooter writes his letter and tells them what he's doing, and he was working at the movie house. He was taking tickets, and New Zealand is there. It's a 3D movie. He's the Attack of the Killer Fish, and he's throwing the fish, the boomerang fish.
And of course, the Swedish chef going, "You put it in your face is 3D." I've been saying that line since 1980 something.
For some reason, the Swedish chef has always freaked me out. There was always something menacing. Maybe it's because you could see the real human hands with the puppet, and that kind of like broke my brain. But he's always freaked me. He's always freaked me out for some reason. But I feel bad. I love Frank Oz. I love the Muppets. But Miss Piggy, she was starting to by Muppets Take Manhattan. She was starting to grate on me a little bit. So I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear favorite Muppets, and I want to hear Muppets that you might possibly not like so much. So I'm not the only bad guy here.
No, I love Miss Piggy. I love her as herself, but she's really just kind of farther back from the front because it goes Gonzo. Because I was born with a very large nose, and so just seeing Gonzo happy to be himself, like, oh man, I want that so much. And then the rational part of your brain, that's Kermit, and then the irrational part of your brain, that's Fozzie. And so just the Trinity, as it were. And then Miss Piggy bounces in and out.
And it's weird to think that she was only really created as a character or really came to prominence only a couple years before the Muppet movies came out, right before the Muppet Show. I think she did first appear in one of those specials that I was talking about earlier, either Sex and Violence or the Muppet Valentine special. I mean, everybody knows Kermit from Sesame Street, and then they introduced Fozzie and Gonzo. I think the Muppet Show introduced both Fozzie and Gonzo, if I'm not mistaken. So it's surprising to see how quickly they caught on and were beloved in such a short time.
Oh yeah, it's when it comes to like three main characters, you got your Superman, you got your Batman, you got your Wonder Woman, and in the Muppets you got Gonzo, Fozzie, and Kermit. So it's just kind of like the and like in Star Trek, you got Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It's like the Trinity, like your id, the ego, and the super ego. It's the three aspects of man just represented there.
With the Muppets Take Manhattan, the songs I didn't enjoy as much. I do like the Muppet Baby song. That's another earworm that I've had in my head for 40 plus years, that when it came on, I started singing. I was actually singing it to myself over the weekend as I was walking around, and I'm like, I'm singing the Muppet Baby song from the Muppets Take Manhattan. I do always enjoy the crossover of the Muppets crossing over with the Sesame Street characters, and you see that at the end of the Muppets Take Manhattan when Kermit and Piggy finally get married, that they have the Sesame Street characters on the one side.
Yeah, it's always, I think it just struck me as beautiful in because in my head that was a real wedding ceremony, because Kermit leans over to Miss Piggy and going like, I thought Gonzo was supposed to play the preacher, and he goes, and I can't.
That's when she kind of got on my nerves. Also, she kind of laughs at him, basically duping him into getting married, but still, they belong together, so I'll allow it.
Well, he's been stringing her along for 15 years.
That's very true. Like, come on, Kermit, shit or get off the pot. Come on, Kermit. A pig can't wait forever,
That's right.
There was a Christmas special. I think was it Christmas
with
the Muppets or?
I have that on tape actually.
Oh, I'm jealous of you. I wish
Yeah,
I think I've watched. I think it might be on YouTube, but I'm not sure.
yeah. Uh, a friend of mine got it. She heard about a service like you pay them $25, and they kind of dig out some of the older TV shows with like regional commercials.
Oh, okay.
Because like Duracell and orange juice and all that stuff, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
man, I miss those commercials.
Yeah, that's the best. I actually kind of like watching those specials with the commercials because it's just a total time warp.
Yeah,
And
it's just funny, like like I'm probably the only person that in my area that it says time to make the donuts.
there was that special where they all interacted with each other, and that was like our Infinity War back then,
It
to get to
was.
see all of the Muppets together and interacting with each other. That was the first shared universe, basically. I do like the Muppet cameos, the Sesame Street cameos in the Muppet movies, like with Big Bird in the Muppet movie as he's walking, and they ask if he needs a ride, and he says he's going to New York to make it big in public television.
Yeah, and you just say good luck.
Good luck.
We,
I brought up Muppet Babies, so after Muppets Take Manhattan, I watched Muppet Babies. Muppet Babies was a great show on Saturday morning, but that was kind of, I think I grew out of the Muppets after that. I know I went and saw a couple of the movies afterward as I got older. It was never anything that I said, oh, I'm too old and sophisticated, I don't like them anymore. It wasn't that. I just wasn't as into them as I was growing up, because I still went and saw Muppet Treasure Island and what was the Muppets in Space?
I kind of rate them in descending order of appearance because Muppet Christmas Carol, that one came out, and that was kind of like the last. I wouldn't say hurrah, but it was the last kind of original players.
Yep.
And then Muppet Treasure Island. Although anything with Tim Curry is just that's my jam.
He is somebody who was perfect to pair up with the Muppets, because I think that he's one of those guys like Steve Martin, like Charles Grodin, who will just throw himself into it and he doesn't
Oh
care.
yeah, yeah. Well, because the man himself is a Muppet. It's just,
Exactly.
I'm sure you've seen the meme where it shows Tim Curry on one side and Muppet Christmas Carol actor
Michael Caine?
Michael Caine on the other side. It's like one is a Muppet and the other played his part as serious as a heart attack, and that's why they're so good. It's just
Yep.
both extremes. Like Tim Curry, he was as silly and vivacious as the Muppets themselves. Like he was a Muppet.
But
And
that's funny
then,
to bring up, though, because Michael Caine did play it really well. That
oh
he
yeah,
played it dead serious, but again, he's not winking at the camera. He's playing it dead serious, but that's what makes it so good, because he's
yeah,
not
yeah,
doing it ironically.
yeah. And they've asked him like, why did you do it that way? It's like he said, and I'm paraphrasing. He said basically, these are actors. They're Muppets, but they're actors, and I'm going to treat them with respect. And I'm like, damn, Michael Caine, damn.
And that goes back again. I think that they brought up this argument in the early 2000s with the Lord of the Rings movies, where they said that Andy Serkis should have been nominated for Gollum. And, people said, well, he's motion captured, but he made a fully formed character. It doesn't matter that he was motion captured. He put on screen a fully formed character that you believe. You're not looking at it saying, oh, well, that's a CGI creation. No, you're saying that's Gollum. And even though it's not officially the Muppets, but Frank Oz with Yoda. Frank Oz, you can CGI Yoda and make him jump around and lightsaber fight, but I like that, but I will take Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, who is spitting wisdom at Luke Skywalker and making me feel him raising up that X-Wing fighter out of the swamp. And that's in Frank Oz's performance. And the same thing with Jim Henson as Kermit and other characters. I think people don't give the proper amount of respect that, and that what you said about Michael Caine, what he said about them. They are actors, and it's even harder to try to emote through controlling something, and they're not using their own faces, their own bodies, really. So to be able to do that and make people like us want to do a podcast about it all these years later because you fall in love with these characters, it's something special.
Yeah, because like Jim just showed us a mirror to ourselves. That's kind of all he did with the whimsy and the silliness and the sadness is just a reflection of us as people. You know, some of us are New Zealand who throw fishes. Some of us are the Swedish stuff who no one understands. It's just it's just a reflection, and it just really it just makes you feel, and that's what the
Yeah.
Muppets did, and that's why even even now when the Muppets aren't as high profile as they were, they'll always have a place in your heart because they made you feel, it made you understand yourself a little bit better.
I think what you just said is really perfect too as a tagline, not only for this episode, but for the Muppets in general, where they make you feel whimsy, they make you feel sad, they make you, especially that melancholy. And I think again, that's something that I think we as in the generation, they weren't afraid, not just the Muppets, but a lot of pop culture that was aimed at children. They weren't afraid to lean into that melancholy that you could feel and that feeling of being different and turning it on its head, like we say with Gonzo and even with a lot of the Muppets. I do like that in most of the movies, the Muppets themselves, nobody blinks an eye that it's a frog that is talking to them
Yeah,
or a pig.
like the scene in the when he's talking with Columbo on the park bench.
That's great. That's Peter Falk is
Yeah,
amazing in that scene.
he's just like, "I'm going to tell you a problem here, friend," and then he just riffs for like 10 minutes, and Kermit's like, "Polite, yeah, 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 yeah." It's like, "Well, that's amazing." Oh, thank you, thank you. Like you, everything you said was wrong.
Well, would you like to buy a watch?
Yeah, just just
Peter Falk was a national treasure, but
he
he
was.
was somebody who also, you have to be thinking to yourself as an actor. A lot of they talk now about with CGI where it's actors working against green screens and there's nothing there, or it's like a tennis ball on a stick that they have to talk to and act against. But you got to think of Peter Falk doing this whole big monologue, and he's sitting next to a puppet with somebody most likely standing behind him with
Yeah,
their hand up its ass, and he's giving this great comedic performance and doing it effortlessly, which is amazing.
yeah. Well, and think about John Cleese in The Great Muppet Caper. Like he breaks into his house and he's just like, can I help you? And they're like, oh yes, a good dinner place. No, no, don't go to that one. You should go here. And then he goes back to his missus, and she's like, oh, what was that? Like, oh, a pig broke in. And like, what did she want? Well, she wanted a good place to eat. Like, well, did you tell her about this place? And like, no, no, I didn't. I should have. I'm like, oh, well, oh well.
And that brings up the adult nature of the. Now, as a kid, I probably just thought it was funny because you saw Kermit and Miss Piggy running around and trying to hide, but to see that dry John, and that was probably the first time I was introduced to John Cleese also, but to see that dry English wit, and you get that their whole history as a married couple in that 5 to
Yeah,
10 minute scene.
like the house is completely abandoned.
Or I think she says to him that the butler died 5 years. He says maybe
Yeah,
we should ask the butler, and she says, oh, the butler died 5 years ago. The maid left 8 years ago. I probably, when I watched Faulty Towers years later, I probably was like, oh, that's the guy from the Great Muppet Caper.
well, and that's I really the Muppets is like a real nexus point of just comedy and thanks to all the cameos, like, oh, I really like this actor. He was really funny. I wonder what else he was in. And then with John Cleese, like that's a whole world right there. And just it's just just Peter Falk. Like that Columbo's a podcast in of itself.
You're right. It's I talk a lot about bands. One of the episodes I just released was on 90s grunge, and I said that when I started getting into bands like Pearl Jam and Nirvana, I heard them talk about other bands, which made me want to go and seek out these other bands because I figured, well, if I like this band, I'm probably going to like that band. And maybe I didn't, but it was also, but they still led me to other things and led me to discover other forms of music. And we said it on the episode. You always think that the band that you like is just listening to the same exact music that you like, and you discover that they're not. And there's all of this other music that you can discover. And that was the thing with the Muppets also. And it goes back to saying that it didn't just appeal to kids, it appealed to adults. You saw all these other people, and we keep bringing it up. It was probably the first time a lot of people saw Steve Martin, the first time a lot of people saw Charles Grodin or saw John Cleese, saw Liza Minnelli. And then when I was watching Arthur a couple of years later, I said, oh, that's the person. I wonder who that is. Oh, that I'm watching The Jerk. Oh, Steve Martin. Yeah, that's right. He was in the Muppet. He was in the Muppets. And it was the same thing with the Muppet Show and even Sesame Street, when it was such a time back then, especially in the 70s. And you still get, because there have been newer Muppet movies, and even the ones we talked about, like Muppet Treasure Island and Muppet Christmas Carol, where you got big stars to be in it. But that time in the 70s where you could see Stevie Wonder performing Superstition, or you could see James Earl Jones doing the alphabet, and it was so groundbreaking. And I mean, I'm talking watching these retrospective shows, but just being amazed that this was actually being put out there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it just seems amazing, and it just seems like it's a time that I don't think you'll ever be able to recapture, that kind of energy where, it was for kids, but it also wasn't for kids. And I think Henson and all the people who worked with him were right there, and they were pushing that.
Yeah. And I also think we had kind of a similar, I wouldn't say renaissance, but definitely pop culture explosion in the 90s with, like, the 92 to 99 SNL players, those guys, Dana Carvey and stuff like that, and MST3K, that blew up in the 90s because it was just people who grew up in the 70s wanting to go out and make their own Muppet Show, make their own content. And it's just, and then of course we're the lucky ones who got to see it all.
Which was good, because we brought up The Dark Crystal, a bunch of other stuff that it was funny researching. I was looking at the Muppet movie and looking at the box office of all the movies, and they all did well, but each one made a little bit less than the other. So I think in my head, I thought all of them were huge blockbusters. None of them bombed out, but they all kind of fell off a little bit with each one. And then when Henson was making Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, both of them came in under expectations, and it disappointed him because he was trying to push forward and go into something different, and audiences just weren't buying it. And then, I mean, the times were changing then too, getting into the mid to late 80s. And you had brought up, he did come back and did a couple other TV shows like The Storyteller, and always had his hands in a bunch of stuff. But by the early 90s, Disney bought the Muppets. And I kind of think that's what I'm very disappointed. I'm not a hater of Disney, but I do think that they have mismanaged. I don't think they ever really knew what to do with the Muppets. And I think the Muppets are in many ways the total opposite of what Disney is, in a way that I just don't think it was a marriage that was made in heaven.
Yeah, well, the merger back in, I think, 91, because they were like right in the middle of it, and he passed away, and then so it kind of was tabled for a time, and then they officially bought the Muppets. And so it's just because I think because it didn't come from Disney itself, they didn't know what to do with it. It's like someone handing you this really amazing car, but you didn't create it. You didn't even know how to drive it. So you're just like, well, that's great. I have no idea what to do with this. I'm going to set this here, and then I'll come back to it. And I have to give really a lot of props to Jason Segel for his Muppet movie, because that really brought back, because he was like, I think he's similar age like we are, and so that allowed him to bring back what he liked about the Muppets, and that's what I think a lot of what they needed for the Muppets, because just kind of like someone to champion them again, who wasn't a Muppet.
Yeah. But it's weird, though, that movie did well, but I thought it was going to kind of lead to a resurgence. But then the sequel came out, and it didn't do as well. And I kind of think right now, they have fallen back in the mind. I don't think they're in the forefront of pop culture like I think they should be. And like I said, maybe that's my fault and parents like me because I just haven't pushed the Muppets to my kids. I don't know why, because it was something I always enjoyed and I've tried to indoctrinate them into the other things that I've liked, but it was just something that I never got them into. So I don't know, and this can lead us to, I know you wanted to talk about the changes that are going on at Disney World with the
Yeah,
ride. Muppets 3D will be going away, correct? Or is it currently as it?
in June is this last month. I was
Okay,
very fortunate to be there just a month ago, and so I got to sit in the theater one last time and watch the Muppet 3D movie, and so and kind of like you wave to the Kermit and wave to the penguins and kind of like take as many pictures as I could take.
I forget what is it changing into again? I forget what it's.
um,
I need my wife here. She's the Disney expert.
it's going to be Cars Land.
That's right.
That
Yes,
whole space is going out. Rock and Roller Coaster is being rebranded from Aerosmith to Muppet Mayhem.
that's right. So they're not going to be totally. But again, I feel like that Muppet 3D experience is one of the last vestiges of Jim Henson and all of those guys who, because they worked on it when it was being made,
Yeah,
I believe.
that was Jim's last full project before he
Yeah.
wasn't able to do anything.
So it's almost kind of the last thing that the originals worked on, and now, as I said, I just don't. I think you have to be in a certain mindset to do the Muppets, and just having them as an IP like Disney has, you can't just throw them out there because they're
Yeah,
so unique, and you need just that slightly skewed and off kilter personality and humor and brilliance that Jim Henson and Frank Oz and all the people that worked with them had. And I just don't it's not, I'm not trying to bring anybody down who have, like you said, the Jason Segel movie did try to recapture and did kind of recapture some of that energy. And I think for generations now, like my kids know who they are, but they just know them as an IP and just as they know them to see them, but I don't think they appreciate them like we appreciate them.
true. Yeah, my kid, he's a super nerd like my wife and I, and so uh, we just I when he was born, I just expunged him in all that stuff like Star Wars, Transformers, every 80s IP I can think of, Jason and the Wheeled Warriors, just all that stuff, and just most of it stuck. So thankfully, but it's just I think it real boil like if you want to kind of like boil the Muppets down, it's that song in the Muppet movie. It's like, don't stop dreaming, don't stop caring. It's just Muppets may be gone now, but they'll be back on the next rainbow.
Wow. Okay, that has got to be how we wrap it up because that was the perfect ending to I think what we were talking about. And I know what song I'm going to put at the end of the episode as this fades out. But this was fun. I don't want to end it on like I don't think we're being, I don't want to be depressed because watching those three Muppet movies, I do think when I find time there's as everybody brings up, there's so much now. There's so much content out there to watch, and there's so much, and I find one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was because I'm starting to hit that age where, yes, I don't go to the Minecraft movie because I don't care, but I'd like to talk about and revisit the things that I do like, such as the Muppets. So now knowing that the Muppet Show is on Disney Plus, eventually I'm going to sit down one night as I'm scrolling through the 20 million channels that I have with all this unlimited content and say, you know what? I want to watch the Rita Moreno episode of The Muppet Show from 1977. And I want to just smile and enjoy myself.
Yeah, yeah, you can't go wrong with an episode of the Muppet Show.
If you want to smile and enjoy yourself, watch The Muppets. And you might cry too.
Yeah, and definitely watch the Milton Berle versus Waldorf and Statler part. That was the best 8 minutes.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on Waldorf and Statler. I think most of Muppet fans started out as Kermit, and much like myself, I might have started out as Kermit or Gonzo. But as I have gotten older and grown more cynical and crusty, I have become either Statler
Yeah.
or Waldorf.
Well, that's
Or
the
let's just
life
say
arc
I
there.
relate I relate more to them.
Yeah, Yep, yep. If I had $1 for every time I said, "Look, Ma, no brains," you know.
But even they will make you smile and give you a good time. So I don't think that's too much of a bad thing.
No, they're getting with us. They're getting with us.
That's right. So Melody, after your first podcast, how did it feel? Was it everything you thought it would be?
It was. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I want to say you were great. Like, I will have you on if you want to talk about Steve Martin. What were the other things what were the other 27 things that you brought up that I could have
Well,
episodes on?
I also said if you ever talk about MST3K, I have to be on.
That's right.
Because I think I had the prototypical experience. I spent months going, what are those shadows doing in the corner? And then one night I said, okay, I've been seeing this thing for months now. What is this? And then just, proceeded to pee myself with laughing.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be a dedicated episode to just MST3K, or I really wanted to do one on Comedy Channel because it was such a big part of me growing up in my early high school years. And that was watching MST3K when it first started, even when it was Comedy Central. And then it became was it Comedy Channel and then became Comedy Central?
Yeah, first it was the Comedy Channel. And for a time, the competitor of that Human Channel,
That's right.
My parents could afford cable at that time, so I was watching both. I'm like, this is weird.
Well, that was when I first was able to watch older Saturday Night Live episodes because the Comedy Channel was rerunning not even just the first 5 years, but like the 6th season, which you never saw because that was such a disaster of a season that almost got the show canceled. But that's how I consumed a lot of old, and even the Dick Ebersol years that they never talk about now because Lorne Michaels wasn't there. I will always stand for the Dick Ebersol years just because that's when I was super young. That's when I was watching Saturday Night Live with Eddie Murphy. So even though I went on to get into the Dana Carvey years and everything, I was watching with Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy. So yeah, it's either going to be an MST3K by itself or it might just be a Comedy Channel and have that part of it. I don't know yet, but that is far into the future. As for now, I do want to say again, thank you for coming on. And now that you've done one podcast, you're going to want to do a million of them because you see, it's totally easy. It's like sitting down and talking to a friend over coffee about the things you love.
Yep, I'll definitely be. If you ever want me back, just say the word, and I'll be back.
Oh, you'll definitely be back. You will definitely be back. Until then, if you want to tell people where they can find you out on the internet.
Oh, I couldn't think of my Twitter handle to save my life right now.
Well, I'm glad that you called it Twitter because I still call it Twitter too. I will not call it the other name. I will not give that person the satisfaction. But if anybody is looking for me on Twitter, it's at Mick Jamison1 or thislightsaberkillsfacists. And it's the same thing on Bluesky, thislightsaberkillsfacists or Mick Jamison1. We're on Apple and Spotify. So please rate, review the show, give it a share. It helps with the algorithm, helps get more people listening to it, which I would love. And I just want to say I'm excited for a lot of the shows we have coming up. They're very eclectic. We're going to be doing a show on the What's Happening episode with the Doobie Brothers very soon. We're going to also be bringing up the melancholy that we all felt in the 70s as kids, an episode on the Puff the Magic Dragon animated special, which I might cry through that whole episode. I cannot promise that I will not shed tears. I've been very, very excited that people have reached out to me and given me their ideas for episodes. So I keep saying it, even if it's stuff that I don't feel passionate about, I am always open to learning about other people's passions because that's really interesting to me. We did that with the Pokemon episodes. I had no knowledge of Pokemon, and after the 2.5 hours of the episode, I felt like I still didn't have that much knowledge, but I felt a little bit more knowledgeable. So that was fun. Yeah, Melody, I want to say again, thank you. Even though I took you away from helping with the groceries.
All right. I really
that's why I have to schedule these podcasts when my wife is away. because then I could just leave my teenager upstairs. He doesn't even notice I'm gone. So I had a great time. I hope you had a great time also.
I did. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Great. And I will definitely have you on again. And I just want to say to everybody out there, thank you for listening. And we will talk to you soon. Bye.
Night, everybody.
Life's like a movie, write your own ending, keep believing, keep pretending we've done just what we set out to do.